Welcome to the Pit Village podcast. Thank you for joining us. Now, I'm a little rusty, bear with me. We covered mental health last week, and it's Mental Health Week this week. It's Wednesday, the 12th of May, and I've been thinking a lot recently just about life, and mental health is a massive thing for me. I've struggled with it for many years. If you go back to the beginning of this podcast, the first couple of things I covered were bereavements and death, and I've grown a lot since then. It's only been 2 months, but this podcast has allowed me to do a lot of self-reflection, and I think that's what mental health is about. It's actually knowing yourself and understanding your own feelings and who you are, and not being ashamed of yourself, and not hiding away from the world and letting other people dim your light, or indeed nobody else is doing anything to you. It's your perception of other people and what they may think that stops you from doing anything that you may want to do, which of course may lead to the repressed feelings and emotions that Sigmund Freud would, let you know that is the problem. That is the problem, your repressed emotions. Do you know what? Sigmund Freud and Carl Rogers and Carl Jung and all these people from the last 100 years, you can look at the work and you can look at these stages of development that he come up with. Sigmund Freud in the late 1800s. It were like the oral stage, the anal stage, and all this. And a lot of people are like, shun it. It's nonsense, that, this and that. But we should not look at history and call these people idiots. Because over the last couple of thousand years, let's be honest, there's been a lot of thinking done to get us to the point where we are. And this is where I want to start. The modern day struggle. The modern day struggle is not one of scarcity and, we're struggling to survive. Actually, it is one of abundance, and the struggle comes from having too much, whether that be too much choice, too much entertainment, too much food, too many things on our mind in order to cope. So we've got to actually make the right choices in life in order to set a foundation within our lives that serves us well. And a lot of the things that are perpetuated to us actually don't serve us well, whether it's the news headlines that keep us in fear and anxiety in order to be controlled, whether it is the advertisements that constantly want us to buy food that is not good for us, that actually makes us more hungry, and products that only make us feel like we were not enough in the first place. Let's go and spend hundreds of pounds on this. And this is where we're at in society. We have got an abundance of information. We've got an abundance of messaging and advertisements and people trying to fight for our attention. And actually, it's overwhelming, isn't it? We are not set up fundamentally to deal with these sorts of things. And over the last, let's say, 50 years, there's been a lot of scientific development, particularly on the mind and how they can use our innate desires and basically our primal instincts against us online in advertising. So let's speak about advertising. In 1921, there was a book written called Scientific Advertising, and through mail orders, they could actually get the right headlines, get the right text, and look at the psychology it takes to actually make somebody make that purchase. And over the last 100 years, from scientific advertising being written, which says that advertising is actually a direct science. It's something that can be studied, measured, tested, it's observable, and you can get it to a point where it's the most profitable that it could be by changing the headline, by changing this, by putting, a coupon so people are actually instinctively going to mail in and whatever it may be. Today, we look at marketing funnels, and of course, people are brought in, whether it's you visit the website, you're then retargeted with an advertisement on social media or on YouTube. You click on that, you're entered into the email marketing list in order to download a PDF document and get a free content from them. But they know that by giving you a piece of free content, that you will instinctively want to give them something back and reciprocate that. Again, through science, they know this. And they know about all the cognitive biases and the repetition. And, if they... the frequency bias. So if you continue to repeat something to somebody, they're going to accept that as truth, whether it's true or not. And they know all this stuff. And this has been developed. What do you think Nazi Germany was? And the use of propaganda. And there's a book called Propaganda. that I read many years ago that sort of outlines the way in which you manipulate a population. So they know about all this now. They know this and they use it against us, actually, in order to control us. And I don't want to go all conspiratorial or anything, but that's just how it is. And the advertisement agencies and the Facebooks and the YouTubes and these people, they use all this against us in order to hijack our attention and use our primal desires against us. So that's all I'm saying. The modern day struggle today is fighting against all that, but also making the right choices in life, setting up a business and having the right foundations within that business, something that can actually scale and grow for you, that is not labor intensive. So it's hard to make sort of a success of yourself, but what we have got to do is first and foremost recognize that we live in a world of abundance and be grateful for that. And actually then we can start to push ourselves outside of our comfort zone in order to continue to grow and not get stuck and become domesticated, because a lot of us will become domesticated with couch potatoes, myself included. You know, I've become lazy. I've developed a business, and I'll tell you the truth, I've become a little bit lazy and complacent. And this has only been over the last couple of months. My head exploded because I had that much work going off. And I just thought, you know what, I need to take a break. And over the last 4 weeks, I've had to step away from the business. And also the podcast, because I felt pressured to do this. And this is where the research comes in over the last week, the reading and just what I've had on my mind. Again, you go back from Sigmund Freud and the last 100 years, where we have made a lot of developments, specifically scientifically on the mind. So we actually know what is going off. We know the triggers. We know how to hook people and make people addicted to products and all this. The tech companies know this, and we've come a long way, let's be honest. But where does society start? And if you look at commerce, it is actually like the 1700s, the Industrial Revolution, the 1800s in the States, where you had people like Josiah Woodward, and this is like the grandfather of Charles Darwin, and you know, it just shows that the wealth actually trickled down to the grandchildren, and they become scientists. And a lot of these people, philosophers, they come from wealthy families because they could step back and said, you know what, I don't want to do law. You can make the money, and I'm going to go off and I'm going to research and go to Yale. And there weren't any opportunity to do this. So you go back to people that laid the foundations for society. Josiah Woodward in commerce actually developed like the traveling salesman, the door-to-door salesman, and illustrated brochures, because again we had the printing press in like the 1400s, the Gutenberg printing press, which allowed people to have access to information. You got to think most people couldn't actually read, but in the 1800s, after the Industrial Revolution, and of course over in America when things start to become industrialized and you got the railroads and all this stuff, basically they had the emergence of a middle class, and this has all come from the Enlightenment in the 1700s, and before that, the 1600s. Rene Descartes, he was a French philosopher, and essentially he is quoted as saying, "I think, therefore I am." But it was the birth, actually, of rationalism and thinking outside of the church and within religion. Therefore, he was a great influence on the next philosophers, such as David Hume, who would again give birth to skepticism and empiricism, naturalism. Empiricism is basically everything is learned rather than being an innate knowledge. And in the 1600s and 1700s, they had the debate pop up between empiricism and rationalism. And of course, this gave birth to the scientific method. So things have got to be testable, observable, and repeatable in order to be an experiment. So it's a sort of philosophy. It's a philosophy, a science, isn't it? So you then move on from David Hume, rationalism, empiricism. We don't move on from this, but we build upon this. People such as John Locke, which again considered one of the first British empiricists. He gave birth to social contract theory and the concepts of the self and identity. And don't think that I'm a genius. I can't tell you all this off at the top of the head. I'm just going through the people I've been reading about. I've not read any of the work. I need to do a lot more, and by all means it's making me appreciate academia and people who may have gone and studied philosophy and these things at university. I bet it does allow you to be a much sharper thinker. So I'm going to read all these people's work. David Hume, who again, highly influential system of philosophical empiricism, skepticism, and naturalism. So empiricism is a theory that states that knowledge comes only or primarily from sensory experience. So actually the human being is born a blank slate, and then we develop our thoughts only through experience. Rationalism is the view that regards reason as the chief source and test of knowledge, or any view appealing to reason as a source of knowledge or justification. And a rationalist would say that actually we're born with some innate knowledge of the world, and that is sort of brought out of us through the experience. So it's a nature-nurture debate, essentially, but on a lot more deeper level, on a more philosophical level, rather than just, oh, is it because you were born, or is it because of this? You know, this gave birth to the scientific method, and of course people such as John Locke gave birth to the modern conceptions of identity and the self. And it says, figuring prominently in the work of later philosophers such as David Hume and Immanuel Kant, which is where we move to next. Immanuel Kant, German philosopher and one of the central Enlightenment thinkers. So in the 1700s, it says, his comprehensive and systematic works on epistemology, metaphysics, ethics, and aesthetics have made him one of the most influential figures in modern Western philosophy. In his doctrine of transcendental idealism, Kant argued that space and times are mere forms of intuition which structure all experience, and therefore that while things in themselves exist and contribute to experience, they are nonetheless distinct from objects of experience. Now don't ask me what that means, because again, I haven't read any of his work, and I'm just reading off of Wikipedia. But what I have been doing is studying this guy, Arthur Schopenhauer. He built on the work of Immanuel Kant, and he wrote The World as Will and Representation. And he spoke about the will, and he sort of described it. This is where all this has come from. So I was looking at the will. I was looking at, right, it's Nature Week. Let's look at nature versus nurture. And actually, Freud would say that we've got this innate desire inside of us. And you look at the will, the only thing that we sort of talk about is willpower when it comes to maybe, you know, abstaining from things. But actually, what is the will? And if you study the science of getting rich, they will talk about the use of the will and further use of the will. Of course, Napoleon Hill in your self-help books will talk about using the will and desire and sort of controlling that in a way that you can manifest what you want in reality. And it's all become very self-help books and all this, hasn't it, nowadays? Everybody's trying to sell you a course, and I don't believe in any of that. They're trying to sell you on a dream. To create a business and be successful in business is hard. You've got to have a good foundation. There's a lot to think about. You need a team. You need people around you. It's not you think about it and da-da-da and this and that. They're trying to sell you books and sell you courses if they're telling you stuff like that. You know, I'm not saying don't do it, but 90% of businesses do fail over 10 years. Like, they are the numbers, and that is what happens. But of course, let's try and be part of the 10% that do prevail. Of course, I'm all for that. But you've got to look back. When we talk about the will, the guy Arthur Schopenhauer, who would build on the work of Immanuel Kant and all these people that we've sort of touched on. And I haven't gone into detail about these people because I don't know enough. I will openly say that. I've not studied any of these people for extensive periods of time. These are all concepts to me that I need to explore and get a deeper understanding of. But I want to open up the floor about them to you guys, if you are listening. Go and look at this stuff: rationalism, empiricism, the birth of the scientific method, Rene Descartes, John Locke, David Hume, Immanuel Kant. And then, of course, we're talking about Arthur Schopenhauer. And he would say, in the world as will and representation, it would describe the will as sort of an innate force inside of us that just wants to continue to thrive and survive. And throughout his books, from what I understand, and he's got many books, again, I haven't read, so I'm an idiot, but he described the will as a blind, unconscious, aimless striving, devoid of knowledge, outside of space and time, and free of all multiplicity. So, building on, how do we get knowledge? This is a study of how do we get knowledge? Why do we do what we do? Why do we exist? Outside of the Enlightenment, basically, we're like, right, all right then, is there any God? And this is what they start questioning, and this is what sort of gave birth to the individualism, which is where we go next. So study Arthur Schopenhauer. It made me question myself, because basically, to put this into my own terms, I've got to the aim in which I wanted to achieve, the amount of customers that I want for my business, just for me to survive. I achieved that aim, and it seems absurd to me to set a new aim and try to grow this business and continue to do this. It would seem that I am only doing that in order to do it. So it sort of started making me question, like, why am I doing this? And you read this Arthur Schopenhauer, and he describes the will as an innate force inside of you that, a blind, unconscious, aimless striving, devoid of knowledge, outside of space and time, and free of all multiplicity. And it is right that when human beings achieve what we want to achieve, we just want more. And it sets us up for misery. This is what the guy would say. It's just an endless suffering, because we actually always want more. And he was one of the first to look at Eastern philosophers and say, right, to sacrifice your ego and your will is the only way in which you'll be happy, outside of maybe being creative and, looking at art and creating your own art. So in the 1700s, this is what they were saying, that, look, devoid of art and creativity and being able to express yourself in ways that is unique to you, then life is meaningless. This is basically what they were saying. So if you go back to last episode and you look at the self-actualizing person and the self-fulfilled person, the self-actualizing person, the fully functioning person, according to Carl Rogers and Abraham Maslow, with a hierarchy of needs. Actually, the self-actualizing person is looking for creativity and spontaneity and to do things, outside of being driven by this will. Just to, why do we need to just keep, battling ourselves, basically, in order to get better? It's a little bit of a paradox, because without that, humanity would still be, sticks and stones in the caves. We wouldn't actually be where we are today. So we've got to be thankful that there's this aimless striving, devoid of knowledge, outside of space and time, because, it might be blind, it might be unconscious, it might be pointless, but it's got to us to a point where actually our struggle is being comfortable, our struggle is having too much, our struggle is not knowing this stuff and not of studying this stuff, and me now being so idiotic that I can't even explain this to you. I feel as though we've let thousands of years worth of cultural and societal development come to a standstill, and what we're arguing about now, pronouns and so and so needs rights and da-da-da. Look, we've had to do a lot to get to this place. Let's not screw it up now by arguing amongst each other about this and that and letting a government come in and take control of us anyway. Because over the last 15 months, what do you think's been happening? You might be able to just get on with your life and just be an individual. And this is where we're going in a moment, talking about Ralph Waldo Emerson and the birth of individualism. But we've had to do a lot to get to this point. A lot of thinking, a lot of development, and the technological development. People have been in poverty all their lives. Most people are illiterate. We have now got access to all information that we may need. We can broadcast ourselves. We can talk to each other. And all it's doing is turning us into mush, into nothing, into robots. That's how I feel. It's like, how is society progressing at the moment? We're on a massive decline in my eyes, just culturally, and I don't know what to think. But let's move on. Ralph Waldo Emerson. Ralph Waldo Emerson, who went by his middle name Waldo, I love that, was an American essayist, lecturer, philosopher, abolitionist, and poet who led the transcendental, I can't say the word, transcendentalist movement. In the mid-19th century, he was a champion of individualism and critic of the countervailing pressures of society, and he disseminated his thoughts through dozens of published essays and more than 15,000 public lectures across the United States. Christ, do you know what I feel like I'm doing? You know when you're in school and you got to read the book to everybody around you? That's what I feel like I'm doing, just reading these bloody Wikipedia pages. But what I did want to focus on is his first essay. It's called Nature, and it brings us back to the Mental Health Week and where we started. This is about mental health, this podcast. As much as I've been ranting and raving, actually, I want to speak about mental health and go online. Don't go online. Do not go online. Stay offline. Go back to the digital detox that I did last month. It felt brilliant, and you'll see from that episode I'm in a great mood when I come back. It's not like I am now, head all over the place and all this. Don't go online, but it's Mental Health Week. Of course, you're going to be online, so of course, just look online for the bloody Mental Health Week, will you? And you'll see that it's nature. And I want to go through the first book or essay that Ralph Waldo Emerson put out. You'd think that I'd have it up on the computer ready, wouldn't you? But I haven't. Nature. Our age is retrospective. Introduction. Our age is retrospective. It builds on the sculptures of the fathers. It writes biographies, histories, and criticism. The foregoing generations beheld God and nature face to face, we through their eyes. Why should not we also enjoy an original relation to the universe? Why should we have a poetry and philosophy of insight and not of tradition, and a religion by revelation to us and not the history of theirs? Embosomed for a season in nature, whose floods of life stream around and through us, and invite us, by the powers they supply, to action proportioned to nature. Why should we grope among the dry bones of the past, or put the living generation into masquerade of its faded wardrobe? The sun shines today also. There is more wool and flax in the fields. There are new lands, new men, new thoughts. Let us demand our own works and laws and worship. Undoubtedly, we have no questions to ask which are unanswerable. We must trust the perfection of the creation so far as to believe that whatever curiosity the order of things has awakened in our minds, the order of things can satisfy. Every man's condition is a solution in hieroglyphic to those who inquiries he would put. He acts it as life before he apprehends it as truth. In like manner, nature is already, in its forms and tendencies, describing its own design. Let us interrogate the great apparition that shines so peacefully around us. Let us inquire, to what end is nature? All science has one aim, namely, to find a theory of nature. We have theories of races and of functions, but scarcely yet a remote approach to the idea of creation. We are now so far from the road to truth that religious teachers dispute and hate each other, and speculative men are esteemed unsound and frivolous. But to a sound judgment, the most abstract truth is the most practical. Whenever a true theory appears, it will be its own evidence. The test is that it will explain all phenomena. Now many are thought not only unexplained, but unexplicable, as language, sleep, madness, dreams, beasts, sex. Philosophically considered, the universe is composed of nature and the soul. Strictly speaking, therefore, all that is separate from us, all which philosophy distinguishes as the not me, that is, both nature and art, all other men and my own body must be ranked under this name, nature. In enumerating the values of nature and casting up their sum, I shall use the word in both senses, in its common and its philosophical import. In inquiries so general as our present one, the inaccuracy is not material, no confusion of thought will occur. Nature, in the common sense, refers to essences unchanged by man, space, the air, the river, the leaf. Art is applied to the mixture of his will with the same things as in a house, a canal, a statue, a picture. But his operations taken together are so insignificant, a little chipping, baking, patching, and washing, that in an impression so grand as that of the world on the human mind, they do not vary the result. Chapter 1. Nature. To go into solitude, a man needs to retire as much from his chamber as from society. I am not solitary whilst I read and write, though nobody is with me. But if a man would be alone, let him look at the stars. The rays that come from those heavenly worlds will separate between them and what he touches. One might think the atmosphere was made transparent with this design to give man, in the heavenly bodies, the perpetual presence of the sublime. Seen in the streets of cities, how great are they! If the stars should appear one night in 1,000 years, how would men believe and adore, and preserve for many generations the remembrance of the city of God which had been shown? But every night come out those envoys of beauty, and light the universe with their admonishing smile. The stars awaken a certain reverence, because, though always present, they are inaccessible, but all natural objects make a kindred impression when the mind is open to their influence. Nature never wears a mean appearance. Neither does the wisest man extort her secret, and lose his curiosity by finding out all her perfection. Nature never became a toy to a wise spirit. The flowers, the animals, the mountains reflected the wisdoms of his best hour, as much as they had delighted the simplicity of this childhood. When we speak of nature in this manner, we have a distinct but most poetical sense in the mind. We mean the integrity of impression made by manifold natural objects. It is this which distinguishes the stick of timber of the woodcutter from the tree of the poet. The charming landscape which I saw this morning is made up of 20 or 30 farms. Miller owns this farm, Locke owns that farm, and Manning the woodland beyond. But none of them own the landscape. There is a property in the horizon which no man has, but he whose eye can integrate all the parts is the poet. This is the best of these man's farms. Yet, to this their warranty deeds give no title. To speak truly, few adults can see nature. Most persons do not see the sun. At least they have a very superficial seeing. The sun illuminates only the eye of the man, but shines into the eye and the heart of the child. The lover of nature is he whose inward and outward senses are still truly adjusted to each other. He who has retained the spirit of infancy even into the era of manhood. His intercourse with heaven and earth becomes part of his daily food. In the presence of nature, a wild delight runs through the man in spite of real sorrows. Nature says, "He is my creature. He shall be glad to be with me." Not the sun or the summer alone, but every hour and season yields its tribute of delight, for every hour and change corresponds to and authorizes a different state of mind, from breathless noon to grimmest midnight. Nature is setting that fits equally well a comic or morning piece. In good health, the air is a cordial of incredible virtue. Crossing a bare common, in snow puddles, at twilight, under a clouded sky, without having in my thoughts any occurrence of a special good fortune, I have enjoyed a perfect exhilaration. I am glad to the brink of fear. In the woods, too, a man casts off his years, and at what period soever of life is always a child. In the woods is perpetual youth. Within these plantations of God, a decorum and sanctity reign. A perennial festival is dressed, and the guest sees not how he should tire of them in 1,000 years. In the woods we return to reason and faith. There I feel that nothing can befall me in life, no disgrace, no calamity, which nature cannot repair. Standing on the bare ground, my head bathed by the blithe air, and uplifted into infinite space, all mean egotism vanishes. I become a transparent eyeball. I am nothing, I see all. The currents of the universal being circulate through me. I am a part or particle of God. The name of the nearest friend sounds then foreign and accidental. To be brothers, to be acquaintances, master or servant, is then a trivial and a disturbance. I am the lover of uncontained and immortal beauty. In the wilderness I find something more dear and connate than in the streets or villages. In the tranquil landscape, and especially in the distant line of the horizon, man beholds somewhat as beautiful as his own nature. The great delight which the fields and woods minister is the suggestion of occult relations between man and the vegetable. I am not alone and unacknowledged. They nod to me, and I to them. The waving of the boughs in the storm is new to me and old. It takes me by surprise, and yet it is not unknown. Its effects is like that of a higher thought or a better emotion coming over me, when I deemed I was thinking justly or doing right. Yet it is certain that the power to produce this delight does not reside in nature, but in man, or in the harmony of both. It is necessary to use these pleasures with great temperance, for nature is not always tricked in holiday attire, but the same scene which yesterday breathed perfume and glittered as for the frolic of the nymphs is overspread with melancholy today. Nature always wear the clothes of the spirit. To a man labouring on calamity, the heat of his own fire hath sadness in it. Then there is a kind of contempt of the landscape felt by him who has just lost by death a dear friend. The sky is less grand as it shuts down over less worth in the population. What is he saying there? Of course, if you are struggling, you cannot appreciate this. But if you don't appreciate this, maybe you are struggling. It's a little bit of a paradox, isn't it? And he goes on. Basically, Ralph Waldo Emerson was the first to say that nature is within us. In the Western world, of course, this is part of Buddhist tradition and all this sort of stuff, the death of the self. But when you talk about development of the individualism and people being individual, he also wrote essays such as Self-Reliance and many others, and of course worked across the United States. It says here published through dozens of published essays and more than 1,500 public lectures across the United States. So in the 1800s, again, this is after the American Revolution, 1776. We've got a lot of stuff going off. In the 1800s, there's a lot of stuff going off in terms of the emergence of the middle class in America. And we talked about earlier Josiah Woodward and what's had to take place in order for us to get to this place. The amount of, Christ, people were illiterate. People, it weren't all fun and games in the 1700s. And for many people, it was hard work. And I acknowledge that today it is. But again, we've got a modern day struggle today, the struggle of abundance, the struggle of our will. Our will, what we talked about earlier in regards to being this, blind, unconscious, aimless, aimless striving, devoid of knowledge, outside of space and time. Of course, this is what he was saying in the 1800s, but we know a lot more about the will and the human brain and how that is hijacked and used against us. And all these companies are doing it, whether it's advertisement agencies, whether it's Google, whether it's Facebook, whether it's YouTube, whether it's Twitter, whether it's WhatsApp. I don't care who it is. They're all trying to get your attention in very subtle ways that try and kidnap your will. This aimless striving, devoid of knowledge outside of space and time, the unconscious, blind striving that keeps you moving forward, that has got to be controlled. In order for you to be happy in this world, your will has to be controlled. You need to sit back and you need the death of the ego. You need to have this, you need to go through some form of spiritual enlightenment, I'm sure, and I've not been through it yet because I drive myself insane over the smallest things. I've got a death anxiety. I think I'm going to die all the time. Talk about mental health. I drive myself insane and I constantly need to be doing something. I constantly need to be working. I constantly need to put out a podcast. I constantly need to be, working on a business and satisfying customers. But actually, what I need to be doing is taking control of my will and thinking, right, why do I want to move forward? What do I want out of life? And just appreciating the basics, the people around you, your day-to-day living, nature. Let's go out there and let's take a walk. Because I know I've just read a bloody paragraph on nature from the SSA of Ralph Waldo Emerson. Go out there and find that. You can find the full book online. And all he's saying is that we are part of nature. Nature is inside of us. And it's not all that he's saying. It's a very important thing that these people have contemplated and thought upon and brought into the universe. And we don't know this stuff. We need to go back to this stuff. And the stuff that our society is built on, we need to study and we need to know. So as I continue to study this stuff, I will let you know. So thanks a lot for your time. I hope you can put yourself first this week. Appreciate your mental health. Bloody hell, it's been 40 minutes. I didn't even realise. Nobody is going to have listened to this, but if you have, thank you. I suppose what we're asking is, can you derive your own meaning from life? Or are you just subject to this constant barrage of, aimless striving that's devoid of any meaning, basically? Like, is your will being overtaken? And are you just doing stuff, just feeding your natural instincts? And if you are doing that, why? Like, let's sit back, let's think, let's take a breath, and let's kill our own ego. Let's chop off the ego and let's stop thinking about me and I and self and what you want, but indeed try to be a service to others and think about how you can work towards a betterment of humanity. That's the plan. So thanks a lot for your time. All the best. I'll speak to you on the next episode of the Pit Village podcast. Today, from the Pit Village of South Emsall. So we're back in the home village and we're home. Let's see how it goes. I'll probably be bored and back in Leeds next week. I have bloody paid for the flat. But have a good day. See you later. Bye.